Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. Today I have what I believe is one of the biggest pivot points in the spiritual and self-cultivation journey. One that can make a enormous amount of difference, if not all the difference, in how we do shadow work and clear out the corners of our mind that need to be dealt with. So we're going to talk about how the 7 deadly sins, but it could be applied to any model similar to that, are a map and not a checklist. And what I say checklist is a list of things not to do. Yeah. So let's take a step back into how our self-cultivation and awakening journey typically begins, which is at the start, we are completely ignorant that there is even such a thing as spiritual development or the cultivation of the mind and heart. And we're just doing our thing. And at some point, either through tragedy or a random awakening or perhaps a proper dose of psychedelics or you name it, we become aware that there is a different dimension that ought to be explored. It could also be that we start to painfully realize that our habits and our patterns are they're taking a heavy toll, and we are in emotional distress, right? So that could also be a fairly good reason to embark in this journey. Now, when we start spirituality, we come to discover that there is such a thing, and that there is the promise of awakening and of transcending suffering. And one of the first things that we start to study is the moral or moralistic, if we look at religion, injunctions to do no evil, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and all these kind of things. And when we start to compare ourselves to the ideal spiritual person, if there is such a thing, we come to a painful conclusion that we fall short. We're doing a lot of things that are essentially unwholesome and wrong, and we start to try and leverage our spiritual efforts to try and improve ourselves, to fix ourselves. Now, in principle, there's nothing wrong with wanting that or with pursuing it. But see, the problem is that we are skipping a little step that I'll get to very soon, and which explains the title of the video, and that little difference makes all the difference. And so, see, at that level, let's take the crudest level possible of how to interpret the 7 deadly sins. Dare I list them and not screw up in this video? Gluttony, lust, envy, sloth, you see, wrath. Is wrath a deadly sin? Probably. And there's a couple more, right? So there you go. I don't know. But at the main message is, do as I say, not as I do. The main message is that at the lowest level, we use the list of 7 deadly sins as things to feel guilty about. Yeah, envy. Oh, I'm feeling envious. I shouldn't be. That's a deadly sin, and now I feel guilty, or I should avoid that behavior, right? So we look at it at the level of behavior and guilt. At that level, there is a great deal of selfhood involved, or doership, sense of doership, aka I feel guilty because I believe that my behavior is entirely my decision, in splendid isolation of all the factors that led to it. And those 7 deadly sins are telling me not to be like that, but despite my best attempts, I just keep doing the same thing. Second level is, now I found spirituality, and I found that meditation improves concentration, it makes me more equanimous, that when I do breath work, I can calm down, I get a little bit of perspective. And now I want to take all those newly acquired mental skills and aptitudes, which can be cultivated, And I want to leverage them and use them to fix myself, to change the way I behave and feel about things. And if we keep using that same model of the deadly sins, then I no longer want to be envious. I no longer want to be wrathful, lustful, and the rest of it. So, see, that's that is a plateau and a typical trap that we fall into, and we can stay there stuck for a very, very, very long time. Some people never make it past that point. And the reason for that is that that point, even though it uses the cultivation of mind and maybe even doing some shadow work and the rest of it, still contains the seed of selfhood, or rather individual identity, and it's trying to make an unwarranted jump. And the unwarranted quality of the jump is explained in the next step, or the next level, and that is as follows. This is the kernel of this video, by the way. Nothing can be transcended until it is entirely brought to the light. And by light, I mean the light of our conscious awareness, meaning we need to have felt it and seen it in all its aspects, narrative aspect, the emotional aspect, the somatic aspect, and the sense of self, and maybe even the perceptual aspect, how things look to us in terms of our five senses about that topic. Yeah. So once we have completely brought to the foreground of awareness, out of the subconscious and towards the conscious, a particular topic, by that same token, it is transcended. Because in having seen all its components, we come to realize that none of them was made of anything remotely like self. Up until the components are seen, the self is that part that remains hidden. So it's like, oh, I am envious, right? So there's a selfhood involved in the topic, and therefore not transcended. Now, the reason I'm not even going to bother with the guilt level, right? If you're watching this, you're probably beyond that already, or sometimes get caught in it, but don't quite buy it. But let's go into why it is an unwarranted jump to try to use the development of mind and heart to change our feelings and behaviors around the seven deadly sins. It is because so long as we think in terms of how do I change this about myself, that means that you are seeing yourself as identified with the problem. And whilst that is a symptom, it indicates that you have not completely seen it for what it is and are therefore not able to transcend it. I'll repeat that in case this became a little bit convoluted. If you try to use spirituality to change yourself, you still feel a sense of self, and the sense of self comes from the fact that you have not mapped out your mind and psychosomatics completely yet, either entirely or about a specific subject. Let's take a specific subject, like this, let's take envy. If your envious tendencies are not fully conscious, and you're trying to change them through spiritual practices, you won't be able to, because the desire to change comes from an identification with the envy, aka it's part of my sense of self, and that indicates you have not fully felt your envious feelings and everything that comes with them. So you can't transcend the envy, not because you're identified because you haven't mapped it fully. That's why you can't transcend it, right? So identification and lack of fully mapping are the same thing. It feels like envy is me, and therefore I'm trying to change my envy. You can't change your envy because there's a you in the picture, aka identification, aka unclarity. Okay, this is it. This is the formula. So the 7 deadly sins understood on the next level becomes a map. A map of what? So away from a checklist of things to avoid or fix, and instead a map of things to fully acknowledge in yourself. You see? You see the difference there? And the acknowledgement, so they're giving you a map. It's like, these are the 7 things that you ought to acknowledge about yourself. And if you think that you don't suffer from them, you just haven't looked closely enough. Pretty much, right? And it's like, oh, I'm not envious. Yeah, you're unconscious, right? That's the essential message here. Of course, different people suffer from deadly sins that are different in degree and the mix of them. But they're present because they are what essentially constitutes our egoic structure, right? They are archetypal responses of the ego given the circumstance. So maybe you are not envious, but that's probably because the circumstances have not elicited that in you. And the moment they do, envy will be right there at your disposal. So what we do is we use the 7 deadly sins, or as I said, any other such model of, aka things to be guilty of or things not to do, things to avoid, and instead we use them to map out our subconscious mind and to have a model at our disposal or a map at our disposal whenever we are feeling distress, rumination, anger, sadness, whatever. The question becomes, which of these am I falling into, that I might bring it to the light, that I might not try to fix it, but rather fully acknowledge that human and egoic as I am in my current state of mind, lust or envy or gluttony is now present. And I'm going to fully acknowledge that. I'm going to come to full terms with the fact that that is the case right now. And not only that, but that I as an individual have no leverage over that because my very sense of individuality is predicated on my identification with the envy or the sloth or the lust or whatever I might be feeling. You see? So I can't pull myself up by my own bootstraps and fix this. My job is to use the map of, the example goes in this one, the 7 deadly sins, to acknowledge that I am currently incurring in one, and I will fully acknowledge that. Full acknowledgement brings things to clarity. Before that, no way. Because trying to fix is trying, in a sense, to get a jump on the sin. I'll try to fix it. But I'll try to fix it without really admitting that I am incurring in this situation, right? Like this sin is present in me. I'm not comfortable acknowledging that I'm an envious bastard. So I'm going to try to fix that, but without really acknowledging it, without feeling all the affects that are behind that, and ultimately all the fear. Remember, I made a video a couple of days ago about how every worry has a fear underpinning it. So you can't transcend any of the 7 deadly sins unless you come to realize that, first of all, it's in you, and secondly, it is the face of a certain fear that you are just too afraid to acknowledge. Okay? So is it more pleasant? No, but it is incredibly more effective. Right? In fact, it is the only chance you have at improving yourself. Right? So you remember I mentioned at the start that it is a valid desire and a valid endeavor to try to transcend the 7 deadly sins. But the point about this is not to use them as things not to do, let alone be guilty of, but rather things to admit. And that takes sincerity and a lot of courage, because it is hurtful to admit just how broken we can be. So we use it as a map of things to admit or confess, if we want to use the religious vernacular, right? And that allows us to make a jump away from it, because now our feet are solidly standing on the ground of what is. This is very, very important. It is such a big difference that you could say that our ability to actually transform ourselves and to do shadow work in a way that is effective sits on, or rather rests on, our ability to sincerely acknowledge that which is inside us, which is the shadow, right? So, in a sense, this entire message is about understanding that the shadow can be fixed, but only through full, clear acknowledgement and acceptance of it first. That's the price to pay for the shadow to actually be managed. Would it ever completely disappear? Well, I don't know. I mean, we are in a human vehicle at the end of the day, so there might be a limit to that. But I would say let's not be bothered too much with that, with those philosophical discussions of like, will my envy disappear 100%? Well, if your envy is a 6 out of 10 right now, bringing it down to 4 could make a dramatic difference in our lives, let alone 2. And to bother with whether we can bring it down to 0 or not, I think is completely beside the point, to be honest. I think that once our psyche and our heart gets a feel for the liberating and invigorating effect of acknowledging our flaws, and the empowering effect of acknowledging our flaws, we switch gears towards acknowledgement as a default, as opposed to obscuration and unconsciousness as a default. So that is the all-important pivot, but it can only be made through the frame and the method as described in this video. So I thought that would be an interesting one to share, and I am very curious as ever to hear what you guys make of it. If you think that these videos and this content is valuable and could help others, your liking, sharing, and subscribing is always welcome, and I invite you thereby to do so. Thanks for listening so far. I'll be back with more videos soon. Cheerio, and bye.